Picture this. You're on vacation with your family
Oh, yeah.
in a beautiful remote place, almost sacred,
Right.
enjoying dinner under a vast star-filled sky.
Mm.
But then in a moment, everything changes. Your
Oh.
baby is gone, vanished from her tent.
Oh.
And the only clue is a chilling cry echoing through the night.
Oh, gosh.
The dingo's got my baby. Today, we're diving deep into the story of baby Azaria Chamberlain, a
Okay.
case that shocked Australia and the world back in 1980.
Yeah, this story isn't just about a tragic disappearance, though, is it?
Right.
It's about how quickly fear and suspicion can grip a nation,
Yeah.
how easily rumors can twist the truth, and how even scientific evidence can be dangerously flawed.
The Chamberlains, Lindy and Michael, were a young couple camping at Uluru.
Right.
You know that iconic rock formation in the heart of the Australian outback
Hmm.
with their 3 children?
Mm-hmm.
And dingoes, those wild dogs, native to Australia, were a common sight around there. But fatal attacks on humans, especially children, were unheard of.
Yeah.
At least that's what people believed at the time.
Well, you have to understand, dingoes aren't your typical domesticated dogs.
Right.
They're apex predators, crucial to Australia's ecosystem.
Oh.
They're intelligent, resourceful, and capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves.
So they're not just cute scavenging pups.
No.
These are wild animals with instincts that can be unpredictable,
Absolutely.
especially when it comes to protecting their territory or finding food.
Exactly. And Uluru with all the tourists and campsites,
Yeah.
that was prime dingo territory.
So let's go back to that night in August 1980. The Chamberlains are having dinner, their 2 older sons are playing nearby, and baby Azaria is asleep in her tent. Suddenly, Lindy screams those words that would become etched in history. The dingo's got my baby.
Wow.
She had just checked on Azaria moments before and found her sleeping peacefully.
And that cry sent shockwaves through the campsite and beyond. Immediately a search began, but Azaria was nowhere to be found. The only traces were dingo tracks near the tent, some bloodstains, and signs of a struggle.
So you'd think that given the location and the evidence,
Right.
the dingo theory would have been the most obvious explanation.
Sure.
But instead of a straightforward investigation, what followed was a whirlwind of rumors, suspicions, and a media frenzy
Yeah.
that would ultimately cloud the search for truth.
Well, you see, the initial investigation, while seemingly supporting the dingo theory, didn't fully satisfy everyone. And as days turned into weeks with no sign of Azaria, public opinion began to shift. The lack of a body, the absence of a clear precedent for dingo attacks on infants, and perhaps a touch of morbid curiosity,
Yeah.
all contributed to a growing sense of unease.
It's almost like people needed someone to blame.
That's a natural human response in the face of tragedy and uncertainty.
Yeah.
We seek explanations, and sometimes those explanations take the form of scapegoats.
And unfortunately, the Chamberlains, already dealing with the unimaginable grief of losing their child,
Right.
became the targets of that blame.
It started subtly with whispers and rumors. The name Azaria, some falsely claimed, meant sacrifice in the wilderness. Lindy's occasional choice to wear black clothing was seen as suspicious.
Oh, wow.
A sign of mourning before there was even a body to mourn.
And then there's the fact that the Chamberlains were Seventh-day Adventists. Their faith, which was relatively uncommon in Australia at the time, became distorted and misrepresented in the media. Some even compared them to cults,
Right.
drawing bizarre parallels to the Jonestown Massacre.
It's a classic example of how pre-existing biases and societal anxieties can be projected onto individuals in moments of crisis. Instead of focusing on the evidence,
Yeah.
people began looking for reasons to distrust the Chamberlains, twisting their beliefs and actions to fit a narrative that was taking shape in the public imagination.
And then about a month after Azaria vanished, a piece of evidence surfaced that seemed to further complicate the story. Azaria's jumpsuit was found partially buried near a dingo lair. But instead of supporting the dingo theory, the jumpsuit's condition raised even more questions.
The jumpsuit was relatively intact with only a few tears and the top button undone. To some, this seemed too neat, too deliberate, as if it couldn't possibly have been the result of a wild animal attack.
It's interesting how our perceptions of what's possible
Yes.
can be so easily swayed by what we've seen or heard before. Because there was no documented case of a dingo killing a child and leaving the clothing so undisturbed, people started to doubt that it could have happened.
The lack of precedent became for some proof of impossibility. And that's where the Northern Territory Police, already facing mounting public pressure to find answers,
Yeah.
began to steer their investigation away from the dingo and towards a far more sinister theory.
They started looking at Lindy as a suspect.
Yeah.
But what evidence did they have?
At this point, it was mostly circumstantial. They focused on perceived inconsistencies in Lindy's story, her demeanor, which some deemed too calm and collected for a grieving mother, and of course the rumors and innuendo that had been circulating in the media.
Yeah.
But to build a stronger case, they needed more tangible evidence, and that's where the forensic analysis came in.
And this is where things take a really dark turn, right?
Yeah.
Because the science they used was anything but reliable. I remember reading about this forensic expert, Joy Kuhl,
Right.
who claimed to have found fetal hemoglobin, the type of blood found in babies, inside the Chamberlain's car.
That's right. Kuhl's findings were presented as a bombshell revelation, suggesting that Azaria had been killed inside the car and that her throat had been cut.
Wow.
This, coupled with a supposed bloody handprint found on Azaria's jumpsuit,
Right.
which the prosecution claimed belonged to Lindy, seemed to seal the case against her.
But wait, didn't you say earlier that the jumpsuit was found weeks after Azaria's disappearance?
Oh, yeah.
How could there still be a fresh handprint on it?
That's a great question, and one that many people raised at the time. The prosecution argued that the handprint was made with a specific type of blood that could remain detectable for longer periods. However, this claim was later challenged by other forensic experts who questioned the validity of the testing methods used.
So already we're seeing cracks in the prosecution's case. And what about that bloody handprint? Was it ever confirmed to be Lindy's?
Well, that's where things get even more bizarre. Upon closer examination, it turned out that the handprint actually had 4 finger segments, which is anatomically impossible for a human hand. It was clearly not a handprint at all, and yet this piece of flawed evidence was still presented to the jury as proof of Lindy's guilt.
It's unbelievable how such a glaring error could slip through the cracks. Did nobody question this?
The problem was that the narrative of Lindy as a cold, calculating killer had already taken hold. Once that story became entrenched in the public consciousness, it seemed that any evidence, no matter how shaky, was interpreted through that lens.
So they were basically looking for anything to confirm their suspicions, rather than looking at the evidence objectively.
Precisely. And to make matters worse, they brought in this so-called dingo expert, all the way from London,
Really?
to testify about the marks on Azaria's jumpsuit.
A dingo expert from London. That seems a bit odd, given that dingoes are unique to Australia.
You're right to be skeptical. This expert, despite having no real experience with dingo behavior in the wild, confidently declared that the marks on the jumpsuit were made by scissors, not dingo teeth.
Wow.
His testimony, which was later discredited, played a significant role in convincing the jury that the dingo theory was implausible.
It sounds like they were grasping at straws, desperately trying to fit the evidence to their predetermined narrative.
And sadly, the power of that narrative proved to be stronger than the truth.
So what happened next? Did the jury buy into all of this?
Unfortunately, yes. Despite the inconsistencies, the flawed evidence, and the lack of a clear motive, Lindy Chamberlain was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Michael received a suspended sentence for being an accessory, although even the judge, while delivering the sentence, seemed to have doubts about the verdict.
This is truly heartbreaking. Lindy maintained her innocence throughout the trial, but her composure, her stoicism in the face of such unimaginable grief was misinterpreted as coldness, further fueling the public's perception of her as a heartless killer.
That's a crucial point. Lindy's demeanor, which was likely a coping mechanism for the trauma she had endured, was weaponized against her. Instead of seeing a grieving mother struggling to hold herself together, they saw a woman devoid of emotion, a woman capable of unspeakable acts.
It's a chilling reminder of how easily we judge people's emotional responses to trauma, how quickly we jump to conclusions based on superficial observations.
Absolutely. And in this case, those judgments had devastating consequences.
So Lindy went to prison for a crime she didn't commit. What happened to her then? Did she ever get a chance to appeal her conviction?
She did, but it was a long and arduous battle. The appeals process dragged on for years, and while there were glimmers of hope, new evidence that cast doubt on the prosecution's case, it wasn't enough to overturn the verdict.
It's amazing how a single event, a twist of fate, can change everything. In 1986, 6 years after Azaria's disappearance, a tourist tragically fell to his death while climbing Uluru. During the search for his body, guess what they found?
They found Azaria's missing white jacket with the lemon edging,
Wow.
lying about 150 yards from the dingo lair. It was like a scene from a movie, a piece of evidence that had been missing for years suddenly appearing at the most unexpected moment.
Wow. Talk about a dramatic turn of events. So the jacket's discovery must have been a huge breakthrough for the Chamberlains. Did it lead to Lindy's immediate release?
It certainly put immense pressure on the authorities to re-examine the case. The jacket's location so close to the dingo lair lent credence to Lindy's story and cast serious doubt on the prosecution's claims. Lindy was granted compassionate release from prison shortly after the jacket was found, but it wasn't a full exoneration. The fight to clear her name to have her conviction officially overturned was far from over.
This is where it gets even more frustrating. You have this key piece of evidence that supports Lindy's story.
Right.
And yet the legal system is still dragging its feet.
The wheels of justice often turn slowly, especially when they're trying to correct a mistake of this magnitude.
Right.
Remember, the prosecution had built a very public, very convincing case against Lindy,
Right.
admitting that they were wrong, that they had convicted an innocent woman based on flawed evidence and a biased investigation.
Yeah.
Was a difficult pill to swallow.
It's not just about admitting they were wrong. It's about acknowledging the system's failure.
Right.
The human cost of that failure.
Exactly. And for
Right.
the Chamberlains, that cost was immeasurable. They lost precious years with their children, their reputations were tarnished, and they endured unimaginable emotional suffering.
Yeah.
But their story also raises broader questions about the reliability of forensic science, the role of media in shaping public opinion, and the dangers of confirmation bias in investigations.
It's a reminder that justice isn't always swift or straightforward.
No.
It's a process often fraught with obstacles.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes years, even decades, for the truth to prevail.
And in the Chamberlain case, the truth was a long time coming. It wasn't until 1987, a full 7 years after Azaria's disappearance, that a royal commission was finally established to reinvestigate the case. This commission, led by a retired judge, meticulously reviewed all the evidence, including the newly discovered jacket and the questionable forensic findings.
So they were basically starting from scratch, trying to piece together what really happened without the biases and preconceived notions that had plagued the original investigation?
Exactly. The commission brought in independent experts to reanalyze the forensic evidence, and their findings were damning. The fetal hemoglobin found in the car.
Right.
It turned out to be a false positive, likely caused by a common household cleaner that contained traces of animal blood, the arterial spray pattern in the car trunk that supposedly indicated a violent struggle.
Yeah.
It was actually sound deadener, a factory-applied substance found in many vehicles at the time, and that infamous handprint on Azaria's jumpsuit. Well, we already discussed how that turned out to be anatomically impossible.
So piece by piece, the prosecution's case was falling apart. It's amazing how science, when properly applied, can either expose the truth or perpetuate a lie.
That's a powerful insight. The Chamberlain case is a stark reminder that forensic science is not infallible.
Right.
It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be misused, misinterpreted, or simply flawed.
Yeah.
And when that happens, the consequences can be devastating.
So with the forensic evidence debunked and the jacket pointing towards the dingo theory, did the Royal Commission finally exonerate Lindy?
They did. In 1988, the commission issued a report that completely overturned the Chamberlain's convictions, stating that there was no credible evidence to suggest that Lindy had killed Azaria, and that the most likely explanation was, in fact, a dingo attack.
That must have been an incredible moment for Lindy and Michael finally having their names cleared after all those years of fighting for justice.
It was a victory, but it came at a tremendous cost. They had endured years of public scorn, imprisonment, and the agonizing loss of their child. The emotional scars of that ordeal would undoubtedly stay with them forever.
And it wasn't quite the end of their legal battles, was it?
No, it wasn't.
I remember reading that it took several more years and another coroner's inquest to officially declare a dingo attack as the cause of Azaria's death.
You're absolutely right. The Northern Territory government, despite the Royal Commission's findings, was hesitant to issue a death certificate that listed a dingo attack as the cause. It wasn't until 2012, 32 years after Azaria's death, that a coroner finally ruled unequivocally that a dingo had taken the baby, bringing a long overdue sense of closure to the case.
It's a bittersweet ending to a story filled with so much pain, injustice, and ultimately resilience.
And it raises important questions about how we as a society respond to tragedy, how easily we allow fear and suspicion to cloud our judgment, and how crucial it is to challenge assumptions and demand rigorous evidence before reaching conclusions.
The Azaria Chamberlain case is a cautionary tale for everyone, a reminder that the pursuit of justice requires more than just evidence. It requires empathy, critical thinking, and a willingness to admit when we're wrong.
And perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of this story is Lindy Chamberlain's unwavering strength throughout the ordeal. She never gave up hope, never stopped fighting for the truth, even when it seemed like the whole world was against her.
It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the most unimaginable hardships.
And it speaks volumes about the power of truth to eventually prevail, even when it's buried under layers of misinformation, prejudice, and flawed systems.
It's fascinating how, even though this case happened decades ago, it still resonates with us today. It feels incredibly relevant in a world where information spreads so rapidly and where it's so easy to form opinions based on headlines and sound bites rather than digging deeper.
Absolutely. The Chamberlain case serves as a stark warning about the dangers of confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs while dismissing evidence that contradicts them.
We see this playing out all the time, don't we?
Yes, we do.
In the way we consume news, engage in social media debates, even in our personal relationships. We tend to gravitate towards information that reinforces our worldviews, even if it's not accurate or complete.
And this tendency can have serious consequences, not just in the legal system, as we've seen with the Chamberlain case, but in all aspects of our lives. It can lead to misunderstandings, conflict, and an inability to engage in meaningful dialogue with those who hold different perspectives.
It's a trap that's easy to fall into, but it's a trap we need to be aware of. We have to consciously challenge ourselves to consider alternative viewpoints, to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong, and to base our judgments on evidence rather than emotions or preconceived notions.
And this brings us to another crucial takeaway from the Chamberlain case, the importance of critical thinking.
Especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides, it's more important than ever to be discerning consumers of information.
Absolutely. We need to develop the skills to evaluate sources, to identify biases, and to separate fact from fiction. It's not always easy, but it's essential for navigating the complexities of the modern world.
So what are some practical tips for developing those critical thinking skills? How can we become more aware of our own biases and avoid falling into the trap of confirmation bias?
One strategy is to actively seek out diverse perspectives. Don't just rely on sources that you agree with or that confirm your existing beliefs. Challenge yourself to read articles or watch news programs from outlets that represent different viewpoints.
That's a great point. It's easy to get stuck in an echo chamber surrounded by people who share our views. But to truly understand an issue, we need to expose ourselves to a wider range of perspectives.
Another tip is to be wary of emotional appeals. Often the most compelling stories, the ones that grab our attention and tug at our heartstrings, are the ones that are most likely to be biased or incomplete.
It's like that saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Sensationalism sells, but it doesn't always reflect the whole truth.
Exactly. So when you encounter a story that elicits a strong emotional response, take a step back and ask yourself, what facts are being presented? What evidence is being used to support the claims? Are there alternative explanations that are being ignored?
It's about training ourselves to be more objective, to look beyond the emotional surface and dig deeper into the substance of the information we're consuming.
Precisely. And that leads us to another key element of critical thinking, asking questions. Don't be afraid to question the information you're given, to challenge assumptions, and to demand evidence.
It's about adopting a healthy skepticism, not necessarily disbelieving everything we hear, but approaching information with a critical eye and a willingness to investigate further.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to change your mind when presented with new evidence. Being a critical thinker means being open to the possibility that you might be wrong and being willing to adjust your beliefs accordingly.
It's about embracing intellectual humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that learning is a lifelong process.
And perhaps one of the most valuable lessons we can learn from the Azaria Chamberlain case is the importance of empathy.
That's an interesting point. How does empathy relate to critical thinking? It's incredible how one case can reveal so much about human nature, about our strengths and our weaknesses. We've talked about the miscarriage of justice, the flawed forensics, and the power of narratives. But what about the media? What role did they play in this whole saga?
Well, the media's role in the Chamberlain case is a complex one. It's controversial. On one hand, they brought the story to national and international attention, which ultimately helped to put pressure on the authorities to re-examine the case. But on the other hand, they often fueled the flames of speculation and sensationalism, contributing to the public's distrust of the Chamberlains and perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
It's interesting how the media can be both a force for good and a source of harm.
Absolutely.
They can shine a light on injustice, but they can also amplify biases and create a distorted view of reality.
Exactly. And in the Chamberlain case, we see a clear example of how media coverage can shape public perception, often to the detriment of those seeking justice. The headlines, the images, the sound bites, they all contributed to a narrative that painted Lindy Chamberlain as a cold, unfeeling killer, rather than a grieving mother who had lost her child in a tragic accident.
It's a reminder that we need to be critical consumers of media,
Yes.
to be aware of the ways in which stories are framed and presented, and to question the narratives that are being sold to us.
Absolutely. We need to be mindful of our own biases and the biases of those presenting the information.
Yeah.
We need to ask ourselves, who benefits from this story being told in this way?
Right.
What perspectives are being excluded or marginalized?
Uh-huh.
What evidence is being presented and what evidence is being omitted?
It's about developing a healthy skepticism, a willingness to question what we see and hear, and a commitment to seeking out multiple perspectives. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways from this deep dive. The Azaria Chamberlain case isn't just a historical event,
Right.
a tragic story from the past. It's a story that continues to hold relevance for us today. A story that challenges us to think critically about the world around us, about the information we consume, and about the judgments we make.
You put it perfectly. The Chamberlain case is a reminder that the pursuit of truth and justice is an ongoing process, a process that requires vigilance, empathy, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
It's a story that encourages us to dig deeper, to question narratives, and to never stop seeking the truth, even when it's elusive or uncomfortable.
And it's a story that reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, the human spirit can endure, and that hope, resilience, and a commitment to justice can ultimately prevail.
We hope this deep dive has given you more than just the facts of the Azaria Chamberlain case. We hope it sparked a curiosity, a desire to question,
Yes.
to learn, and to engage with the world around you in a more informed and compassionate way.
And remember, the next time you encounter a story that seems too sensational, too unbelievable, or too easily explained,
Yeah.
take a moment to pause, to reflect, and to ask yourself, what's the whole story?
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.